All right, so we are talking today about Alexander the Great. No, we talked about Alexander the Great last week. We're talking today about Cleopatra. So this is a story that I would have told you way back in December before we went on break. And we kind of ran out of time. So I just told you guys, time out. I'll save this story for Rome. And now that we've finished up ancient Greece, we're ready to start the Roman Empire unit. So I thought this would be a good segue to it. So here's the deal. We have been outside all day and I'm really sunburned. So I apologize for my lobster appearance. That's just me. So let's get into it. Let's talk about Cleopatra. I think this is actually helpful to have something in front of me to look at, because typically you'll come into class and I'll say, it's just story day. I'm going to tell you a story and it's going to be from the top of my head. And I tend to like go down this road and then forget things. And so at least this year I'll be focused. I have something in front of me to look at. I think that will be helpful. So this says on our first slide, this is the story of Cleopatra, if I haven't made that clear yet. From Alexander to Alexandria. And we have a picture here of my dog, Alessandra, because, you know, we wouldn't have her name without Alexander the Great. Last week, we learned that Alexander the Great, who was the king of Macedonia and Greece, conquered Egypt and he established himself king there. He personally founded the city of Alexandria. Remember, we read that he actually plotted out the city limits, and he wanted it on the harbor for trading purposes. And he wanted that to be the capital of Egypt from therefore. After Alexander died, one of his generals, Ptolemy I Soter, became pharaoh of Egypt. Remember when the kingdom was split up into 3 different kingdoms. So Ptolemy takes over and he becomes pharaoh. This begins the Ptolemaic dynasty of Egypt, and this leads us to Cleopatra, who's Cleopatra Ptolemy after all. That's her last name. Oh, there we go. So this is Ptolemy Dionysius Eleutes. Yes, it's a very Greek name, right? Because Ptolemy was Greek. So one of the things that we have a hard time with is picturing Cleopatra, because we want her to look Egyptian. So she was kind of a descendant of Alexander the Great, maybe they were related. So Alexander the Great's grandmother was her name was Cleopatra, and so was Ptolemy's grandmother, and so it's possible that they were cousins, but we don't really know. And this name, as you'll see, is used all the time, so it's very confusing. But what we do know is that Cleopatra was Greek, was Macedonian Greek. So she could have had curly hair like Alexander, curly blonde hair with green eyes, or she could have had dark hair. The weird thing about her appearance is that we don't know what she looked like, but the Greeks always depict her looking Greek, and the Egyptians always depict her looking Egyptian, and the Romans always depict her looking Roman. She was actually on Roman coins, so we have depictions of her in Rome, and yeah, she was Roman. So Ptolemy the 12th, Neos Dionysius Eleutes, that's her father. We're jumping ahead 250 years. So Ptolemy just took the throne, and then 250 years, we still have a Ptolemy on the throne. Different Ptolemy, 12 Ptolemies later, because much of the story is the same. So if I were to tell you that story, it would be long and boring, because everybody's name is Ptolemy, everybody's married to Cleopatra. Their names tend to run together. It's difficult to keep track of who's who. Even if you look one up, you'll think you're looking at the right Ptolemy, and then it just gets confusing, and you're like, no, I think this is the wrong guy. But there were many Ptolemies, and they were named Ptolemy. The females were always named Cleopatra. It was common for one male and one female from that family to rule at all times. So they kind of shared power, depending on the family, depending on the dynamics there. But Ptolemy Eleutes was Cleopatra's father. He lived from around 100 BCE to 51 BCE. Ptolemy was married to Cleopatra Tryphena, just go with it. He had 6 children. He had 4 girls, Cleopatra Tryphena, I'm telling you. Berenice, which was another name you might be named if you were a Ptolemy girl. Cleopatra the 7th, and Arsinoe. He also had 2 boys, Ptolemy the 13th and Ptolemy the 14th. So, Tryphena was the oldest girl, Cleopatra Tryphena, right? You'll also hear it pronounced Tryphina sometimes. Tryphina or Tryphena was the eldest daughter of Ptolemy the 12th. She seized the throne when her father fled to Rome in 58 BCE. She seized the throne. She wasn't supposed to. Her dad said, "I'm leaving while I'm gone. Don't take the throne." But she did. And she was then killed by his supporters who were like, "We told you not to take the throne." And so she only ruled for a year. After her death, her little sister Berenice took the throne. Like, did you not just see what happened with the last kid? She ruled from 57 BCE until 55 BCE when her father returned from Rome. She was silly enough to be excited that he arrived back. Like, look what I did. I ruled while you were gone. Aren't you proud of me? But he had her beheaded. He was like, no, there was one rule. It was like, don't rule while I'm gone. But she did. So off with her head. On to the next child, Cleopatra the seventh, Philopater. This is our hero, Cleopatra. Cleopatra then became pharaoh of Egypt when her father died. She ruled for 21 years. She was the last pharaoh of Egypt before the Romans conquer. Arsinoe was her little sister. The two never saw eye to eye, although did Cleopatra ever see eye to eye with any of her siblings? I don't think so. Maybe her youngest brother, but we'll get to him. Cleopatra had Arsinoe imprisoned when she became queen so that Arsinoe wouldn't attempt to steal the throne like her sisters had done to her father when he went on to Rome. She had Arsinoe sent to Rome, where she was paraded through the streets in chains just to have her humiliated, and eventually she died. So not the nicest thing to do to a younger sister, for sure. Next child here is Ptolemy the 13th. This was the eldest son of Ptolemy Auletes, Cleopatra's father, right? He was a joint ruler of Cleopatra, so he ruled with her when she first became pharaoh of Egypt. The two were also at odds for much of their time together during an epic brother-sister battle, which involved Julius Caesar, by the way. We'll get to that story. Ptolemy drowned in the Nile by falling overboard because he happened to be wearing solid gold breastplate, which is like the silliest thing. Like, why would you do that? But he was trying to look really cool while he was fighting, and he died. He drowned. So his little brother, Ptolemy the 14th, ruled with Cleopatra after his older brother's death. Always a sickly child. Ptolemy died at 15. He had some sort of illness his whole life, and he passed. Julius Caesar, finally a Roman. So this is why we're talking about this story now, right? Because this story involves the Romans. Here they are. Here's Julius Caesar. If you wondered why I waited until Rome, it's this guy. Julius Caesar was a famous Roman statesman and a general considered one of the greatest men in history. He ruled Rome as dictator from 49 BCE to 44 BCE. Also, Caesar Augustus. Now, this guy's got a seriously long name. I like to call him, it's just my little nickname for him, little nickname, Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus. There's a baby stuck to my leg, Augustus. So not really a shortening of the name, but Augustus was the legal heir of his, and he was the nephew of Julius Caesar, the first Roman emperor. So like, okay, I don't want to give away this story too much, but so if Julius Caesar were to die, he wanted Caesar Augustus to like have his job basically. And he was Roman dictator, so that was a pretty big job. Mark Antony was born in Alexandria to a noble family, Alexandria, so Egypt, right? To a noble family that had ties to Rome. He was a soldier in Rome, a Roman soldier, and he was a personal friend to Julius Caesar, and he served with him in Gaul, which is France. We'll hear more about that later. Mark Antony married Cleopatra, and they had 3 children together. Pompey, a Roman. We already have a Roman. Pompey was an important statesman, a politician in Rome, but he's important to this story because he was also Cleopatra's godfather. Like he was buds with Cleopatra's dad, Ptolemy Auletes. And so he's important to the story because he was married to Julia. Julia was Julius Caesar's daughter, and she was a really important person in history too. But she died while giving birth. And that absolutely devastated Pompeii. And it left Caesar, her dad, heartbroken. And the two could not get along afterward. They were like so miserable about her dying. In the end, Pompey ran away to Egypt, like actually fled Rome to get away from his father-in-law because he was so certain that Caesar would have him killed. And this is probably a good place to start our story. So here we go. The story of Cleopatra. It was 3 years after Julia had died when Pompey realized that he was seen as an obstacle in Caesar's rise to power. See, Rome was a republic, or at least they were supposed to be. They were ruled by a senate, which was made up of senators, right, elected by the people. But Caesar was gaining a lot of power and he was gaining it fast. He also had his own army, which was kind of terrifying. It seemed like he could make any decision he wanted and people just felt compelled to follow it, even though he wasn't like officially, in charge. This put Pompey in a difficult position. Should he stand up against his father-in-law for the sake of the republic? He probably should, but would he? It'd be really difficult. Pompey made a different choice. He fled to Egypt because he thought that the Ptolemy children, we're talking about Cleopatra and the not yet drowned Ptolemy, the 13th, were ruling. Certainly his godchildren would keep him safe. This was an unfortunate miscalculation. You see, Cleopatra and Ptolemy were in that brother-sister epic battle that I mentioned earlier, and Cleopatra had gone into hiding, so she wasn't around. Ptolemy was mad at his sister. So he thought it might actually be a good idea to befriend Caesar. Caesar seems like an important guy in the world right now. Maybe he and I be chums and my sister's left out of that friendship, and that'd be fabulous, right? In fact, one of Ptolemy's advisors suggested murdering Pompey to help Caesar out and also to get his attention. Because after all, the advisor said, and this became a very famous quote, "Dead men don't bite." Pompey arrived in Alexandria's harbor in 48 BCE thinking he was finally safe, only to be swiftly beheaded. Caesar arrived only days later. Ptolemy had Pompey's head delivered to Caesar, who did not find the death at all amusing. So he was trying to Ptolemy was trying to befriend Caesar through this, and Caesar just thought he was insane. He was like, "You just sent my son-in-law's head to me. That's disgusting." It is said that Caesar wept at the sight of his poor son-in-law. What did I do? I pushed him to this, right? He immediately found Ptolemy appalling. Maybe coming to Egypt was a mistake. Caesar's like, "Where am I and why am I here?" But where was Cleopatra in all this? Our hero was still in hiding. She was outside of the city. For some reason, she thought that maybe her brother would, make a complete fool of himself and Caesar would hate him. She thought right. Once it was clear that Caesar had no stomach for Ptolemy, she had herself delivered to his room. The story is that she rolled herself up in a carpet and had it brought to his room. And when he unrolled it, ta-da, she was there. But another story I read said that she mailed herself in a large container that would have housed many scrolls. But how could she breathe if that were the case? I don't know. Anyway, she paid the shipping and bam, she met Caesar. The two fell in love. And in 47 BCE, a son was born to them, Ptolemy the 15th Caesarion. We know him as Little Caesar. Didn't you? Now let's take a minute to think about how lucky this kid is to be royalty. Even though Rome is a republic, they've conquered vast lands and they're more or less ruled by one person, Caesar, right? They look a lot like an empire. They even sound like an empire. Could they be an empire? Well, they don't have Egypt, not yet anyway. But this kid, this child, Little Caesar, he's the heir to both thrones. He could one day rule Egypt. I mean, he's Cleopatra's son. He could one day rule Rome. I mean, he's Julius Caesar's son. It sounds cool. Sounds like the best, right? But it really put a huge target on the poor kid's back. When you hear the name Little Caesar, do you think of an emperor? Do you think of an empire? No, you think of pizza, right? Let's get back to the story. Caesar decided to head back to Rome to check on his republic, in quotation marks, because they're not acting like a republic. The Senate then invited him to come by and speak with them. Caesar died that day, March 15th, 44 BCE, when the Senate surrounded him and stabbed him. Okay, is the republic safe now? A few years after Caesar's death, Mark Antony arrived in Alexandria. Now, Mark Antony was born in Alexandria, but he'd spent most of his adult years as a politician and a military leader in Rome. He and Cleopatra fell in love, and they were married in an Egyptian ceremony. It's a beautiful love story. But who's in charge of Rome? The Senate, right? Well, while Mark Antony was falling in love with Egypt, Caesar Augustus, who was Julius Caesar's nephew, remember? He came to power, and he was named Rome's first emperor. It's official. Rome is an empire at this point. And this is a problem for Mark Antony because he was married to Caesar Augustus's twin sister. He didn't want to be married to her, and she didn't want to be married to him, but it wasn't a choice. That's actually why he'd run off to Egypt. So now he's married to Cleopatra. Things are getting more complicated for our lovebirds. Cleopatra and Mark Antony welcomed some seriously cute babies to the world. They had a pair of twins, Cleopatra Selene and Alexander Helios, and then 4 years later, they had a son named Ptolemy Philadelphus. They wanted to protect their new family from Caesar Augustus, and they wanted to protect Egypt too. In September of 31 BCE, Antony and Cleopatra lost a crucial battle at sea against Augustus. Cleopatra was worried that Augustus would find and kill little Caesar, so she sent him to India. Such a random place. So smart, right? Who would ever imagine she sent him to India? Well, someone must have tipped Augustus off because little Caesar was killed as soon as he landed. He was only 14 years old. Now Augustus knows that no one can say that they have a claim to be emperor of Rome, except for him. Did they anyway? Now back in Egypt. In the battle between Augustus against Cleopatra and Mark Antony, things get heated. The lovebirds are split up. They haven't seen each other in days. Humiliated by military defeat and mistakenly thinking that Cleopatra was dead, Mark Antony stabbed himself. When his friends realized what he had done, they brought him to Cleopatra, who was very much alive. He died in her arms, but she then died as well. The story being that she allowed a puff adder to bite her. And with that, the last pharaoh of Egypt died. Now Egypt is part of the Roman Empire, and we found out they don't rule themselves again for like thousands of years, like to the 1980s, right? Caesar Augustus then claimed Egypt for the Roman Empire. But what about the kids? Alexander, Cleopatra, Ptolemy, all these names we've heard a million times. In a weird twist of fate, Augustus sent them to be raised by his twin sister, the woman who was supposedly married to Mark Antony. I think I'd be a little angry with my brother about this. Poor Octavia. She's like one of the most miserable women, it sounds like, in history. She could have been a very cheerful person, but she always gets the short end of the stick. She got married to someone who didn't love her, and Becky fled to Egypt, right, to get away from her. And then she sent his kids to raise. At this time, the twins were 10 and little Ptolemy was 6. We don't know what happened to Alexander or Ptolemy. They just disappear. They're sent to live with Octavia, and then we never hear about them again. But Cleopatra survives. She becomes an adult. In fact, she marries King Juba II and becomes queen of Mauritania. Cleopatra Selene, that's the Cleopatra we're talking about at this point, right? Had 2 children, Ptolemy and Drusilla. Another Ptolemy. Similarly, we lose track of the boy, but Drusilla played an important role in history. She married Marcus Antonius Felix. He becomes Roman governor in Judea. And then she listened to testimony in court from the Apostle Paul, who was on trial for his belief in Jesus Christ, and her name pops up in the Bible. I think what I love most about this story is that so many of our historical figures converge here. It's not common to have all of these people all show up in one story. It's like the Continental Congress of the ancient world for me. We got Alexander the Great starting us off here. And then Ptolemy, and then Cleopatra, and Pompey, and Julius Caesar, and Caesar Augustus, and Mark Antony, and they all knew each other. And they were all linked in the story. Well, Alexander was dead, so he didn't know them, but they know him for sure. And they were in his city several times. It was a very cool story. I'm glad I got to share it with you, even though you're not here this week. And I hope you have a good week. I'll see you soon. Bye.